Hello, welcome back to the Building Brand Advocacy podcast. My name is Paul Archer, your host, and I'm delighted to be joined by Maddie Sims, absolute brand builder guru. Have worked in the most diverse brands you could imagine, but still has this kind of core ethos of brand building, which I want to kind of start off with. Like recently, we just had Tony from Hammett on, who kind of compared the idea of a brand to your long-term health and longevity of it, and things like discounting is the equivalent of sugar. It's great in the short term, but it doesn't get you to live longer. Like, how do you view the idea of brand building, and how does kind of longevity and short-termism versus long-termism play into that?
Such a good question. And thanks for having me on. So excited to be here. So starting my career at Lululemon in PR, I learned three things very quickly that have shaped how I see the consumer relationship versus just the media relationship. So first one is that your story cannot be self-serving. So when you hit up a media, you cannot, come to them and just basically try and get an ad. That's like what you have to pay for now, right? In journalism. And you want it to be in service of the reader. So it's either inspiring or entertaining or educating, or media. So it's like a scoop or, an exclusive. The second one is that building the relationship with media takes a really long time. So I came in as a coordinator, and we were doing, super well. Within the first couple of weeks, we had a few PR snafus, and we had to learn. I was on the ground floor learning how do you repair relationships with media when there's a bit of distrust, or there's things that have happened at the company that they are trying to get down to versus just build relationship with you. And then I also was in charge of men's PR for a little bit there, where they wanted to shift the brand and grow it rapidly with the men's business. And there was a long time there where I sent out probably hundreds of media samples to men and did not get any coverage. And it was just because we had to play the long game with them. We had to get them in our product and trust them. They thought that the brand wasn't for them at that point. And so it just takes a while. And then the third thing is that you cannot, I don't want to swear, but you cannot use bull crap with media. They can
you can swear all the fucking time.
Okay,
no, we're good with that.
Oh, good. Okay, well, yeah, you can't bullshit your way with media, to put it blankly. So you cannot trick them into writing things. The truth will always prevail. The story that you tell on your brand on all your channels must be in service to the consumer. It needs to be entertaining, inspiring. You do not just want to put ads on your Instagram feed. That just doesn't work unless it's like pointed, like, hey, Halloween is coming and we've got your perfect costume. Never worked on a brand that sells costumes, but alas, that's the point. And then the second is, just like building relationships with media is a long game, so is building brand advocates. So I got used to not seeing the fruits of my labor and the results of that for a very, very long time. Like I just got used to it. And with that, you just trust that the long-term commitment that relationship comes with relationship will come into fruition later on. So I've never been a flash in a pan sort of marketer. If we pay a lot of money to get a consumer one time, it just, to me, is not worth it. I'd rather, invest longer term and build a brand ecosystem that draws consumers in and makes them want to stay and results in higher long-time value, and then resulting in them doing brand advocacy work for you. So again, that's like a long game, less of that short tail results. And then finally, to the third point around bullshitting our way with media, you can't bullshit your way with consumers. I mean, your people on the other end of your Instagram feed are just as savvy as the New York Times journalists. In fact, are not like, they're going to keep digging in the same way that a journalist would. And it's important to treat them as such. It's never a good idea to force your way into your life and into their lives. And you want to invoke curiosity and support your brand's community by showing and not just telling, we see you, we hear you. Just like the media, I went on a lot of sweat dates in New York City with journalists to have them test our gear. And when I was working for Lululemon, and it's the same, like, what is the equivalent to the sweat date with your consumer? And hearing them in your product and working with them to build the brand together.
Love the idea of a sweat date. I can't say I've ever actually been on one myself, but I think it maybe is quite niche into that area there. But if we it's all well and good talking about building a long-term brand, but the vast majority of people don't have kind of a retail brand building genius like Chip Wilson, who's, you know, like rejecting every single thing. You know, he's sticking two fingers up to his investors who are constantly trying to get the returns from him. And add to his detriment, which obviously cost him his job eventually, among other things. But the that's all well and good there, but most people don't have that scenario. Most people have, you know, particularly if you're lucky enough to be the CMO, but if you're not the CMO, you're going to have CEOs, CFOs, investors, whomever it may be, calling for short-term results. And so how do you actually say it's okay? We're playing that long game. We're going to see, you know, we're going to see these results in year 2, year 3, but you got to let me be and do what I'm going to do in year 1.
I mean, some of those like short-term brand metrics do matter. We have the things like social and seeing growth on social. I am a huge fan of looking at shares and engagement on social. Shares especially. I think if someone is willing to send something that you created to their friends and family or their people or on their own platforms, that is like a short-term, you just made something amazing, touching, funny, inspiring, back to all those things that I was saying. That is a perfect example. One of the examples I can give you is we would do these events when I was a community at Lululemon, and we would invest a good amount. We were part of the local Maven team, right? So our job was to basically build in the community, get a feeling for what was going on the ground floor in that community, and then level that up to the global brand and see how that influences the global brand. And one of the rules that I made was like, always have the executives invited to these events, because that's where the magic is happening, is at that ground floor. And until you experience that, it's hard. Like, you want to put a number when you're behind a screen to some of these experiences, events, and brand building touch points. But as soon as you're in that room, you know that, you know, the Seaweeds Half Marathon, for example, with Lululemon, drew 10,000 brand advocates, and it wasn't necessarily a profit building exercise for us, but it brought 10,000 massive fans of Lululemon to Vancouver, which we had written kind of like a love letter to the city through this half marathon. And you would be in that room with these folks and you'd be like, this is palpable. They're all going home to their hometowns and talking about us.
And that storytelling piece, it seems to be really key. Like, once you're getting them in there, you're getting the execs in, they are then building their own narrative of, I met this person who told me this, so therefore I'm getting that real vision for it. And that idea of getting your CFO to get boots on the ground, to start having conversations that will then bolster them up. I guess there's potentially the opportunity to capture stories and narrative that you can sort of send their way as well. But nothing, you know, they probably won't watch them. You know, nothing beats getting them in the room. And so I think that's an amazing tip.
Yeah. And I mean, and part of that is like, there are some organizations that will not want to do brand marketing to this level. And in that case, you adjust and you look at some of those shorter term sales oriented results as a marketer. I have worked in organizations that are more short-term focused. You find other ways that are a passion to the organization, such as eco and impact and inclusion and pieces that, like, they're baseline. Any brand that isn't doing that needs to happen. And that's how you get the, you know, the long-term brand building pieces in a way that is like a bit more palpable to an organization that needs to focus on short-term results. What are your thoughts?
And you said something to me earlier, which I'd love, like, how are we post-blanding? What does this mean?
You know, there's a great Instagram, TikTok branding dude, and he talks a lot about this. I can send you the link for the show notes. I'm sorry, I don't remember his name, but he talks a lot about blending, and this has become a whole subset of TikTok, and how this concept of a lot of millennial brands starting to look the same, feel the same, a lot of sans serif font and white backgrounds and blank space and clean minimalistic feel. A lot of brands started to look like each other on the shelf. And so therefore, when the shift started to be like, okay, millennials are old news, let's hit the Gen Z, we went the opposite way. We went, you know, a little bit maximalism, and we went bright colors. We went unfiltered. We were inspired by Emma Chamberlain and doing photo dumps and UGC content, which is incredible. Like, I actually think that I'm the biggest fan of Gen Z. I feel like they are going to help us change the world. And I think if we can get them on board to brands and co-creating brands, and then investing early in athletes. I haven't been directly on the sports marketing teams, but always worked closely. Lululemon had a very similar mentality of investing in the people that like, first of all, you'd want to hang out with because you will learn something from them. They're good folks, but also they are on the up. They are doing things in their community and maybe just need like a little bit more light shined on them. Influencer, direct link programs. Man, I learned a lot about that at Reef. That works. It converts. But also like a local ambassador program that represents your core values, that they like embody who the brand either is at the current day or who you want the brand to be, is just so crucial.
Yeah, we see quite a lot with the brands that I work with that they're really differentiating between the difference between an affiliate and a creator. And the affiliate is someone who is driving traffic and driving revenue, but they're not necessarily representing the brand. The creator, that is someone they are an actual ambassador. You know, they've been anointed by the brand to officially represent them and their values and who they are and what that means. In the same way that I can be a big fan of a country, but I'm not necessarily the ambassador of that country. They've got to give me that right to do that. And so I think that those sort of differentiations is really, really critical, because the affiliates are an amazing way of getting distribution at a fraction of the price of, buying ads, which is the typical go-to-market for a lot of brands. They don't have very many options left. The creators are the ones who hold your brand in your hand, the ones who you decide to partner with, the ones that you really get to tell your brand story on your behalf. And at the end of the day, brand building is about being cool. When you start looking at an individual basis of looking at who you want to work with as a brand, who are the creators, who are the humans that are able to push that forward, finding someone who's cool is massively important. And I think that it's a gut shot. You know it when you see it. And it has nothing to do with how many followers they've got. But it does tend to have a lot to do with how many engagements they have per followers. That definitely has something that's got to do with it. But that would probably be my perspective of it. But we can talk about that all day, right?
I know. My favorite quote I've ever heard is that interested people are interesting. And it's the folks that like are on their channels and being interested in the communities versus just using it as like a platform to, be self-serving. And same with brands, right? Like interested people, what does that mean across brands? Like, it's one of my favorite quotes. And I think like that's kind of how I've defined cool as I've gotten older. I'm like, who are the coolest people I've met? I'm like, it's usually the most interesting, and they're usually the most interested in the most amount of things possible, or just know a lot of things about random things, right?
So you mentioned culture. Here's a bit more of a kind of a challenging, I don't know if it's challenging or not, but I think trends and culture are different. And at the moment, particularly with TikTok, a trend will happen, a particular TikTok trend of doing a certain video in a certain way with a certain soundtrack or whatever it is. And getting on that as fast as possible is one of the biggest causes of anxiety that I've noticed in some of the brands that we're talking with in terms of their social media. They're like, we got to get the trend before the trend happens, and we can get it's going to pop, it's going to go crazy. Versus culture, which is that the same? Is it a trend? Is culture just long-term trends? How can a brand be at peace with being current, being relevant, being a part of the culture, being a part of the trends, yet not constantly be terrified of missing the next big thing?
It's a great question. I'm just writing it down. Okay, a couple of answers to that. Just generally, you would not believe the amount of brand marketers that I've met that refuse to go on TikTok, that are just like, I'm above this, or I'm too old for this. And I mean, it is where the future is happening. And so maybe you don't necessarily activate on a certain trend, but that is like a window into culture. And because youth drive culture, it's the top platform. Oh, that's probably no longer the case. You can keep me honest here, but one of the top platforms for the youth of our world, and like capital Y. Yes, I sound like an old person saying youths, but this is like where you can understand what is up and coming, what is trending, and not just like the dances and the songs, but like truly, what are people talking about? What do people care about? Keeping up with pop culture and all that keeps you in like the cultural relevancy conversation. It's in service to the consumer. If you can generally guess that your population is watching Ted Lasso tonight, then like, yeah, maybe if a lot of they're doing that, then activate on the Ted Lasso trend or whatever it is. And that's just kind of, again, being in service to your consumer and just meeting them where they're at.
And that's one of the things that's really interesting, is that because there are all those old people that go, well, I'm not on TikTok, it doesn't matter. A brand can put out content on TikTok, or a social media manager can put out content on TikTok that they would never have got sign off anywhere else, because the people who are so intent on their sign off, they don't care enough about it, even though it could be huge. One of the things that we've seen to be like one of the most reliable techniques for actually winning on it as a platform is to kind of relinquish control entirely, and to start thinking, less about it being a centralized brand channel as it is with everything else, and start thinking it as a decentralized channel for getting awareness. So if you could get 50 people to create content on your behalf, a handful of those will hopefully start to get picked up by the algorithm, which means that people are talking about you rather than you talking about you, and a little bit less anxiety in terms of keeping current wherever the trend is, because the creators, if you're asking people to create on your behalf and they're doing it quickly and they're doing it regularly enough, they're involving you in the brand story, then they're actually going to be constantly current, because they will always know far more than any social media manager what is the thing that's making them tick, because it's just made them tick.
I think as brand marketers, we're all getting looser with that. So I agree, relying on others to, as soon as you as soon as you start to co-create your brand, you lose control. And I think like you can't be in that old way of thinking of like, it needs to look like this, it needs to be crisp, clean, and we all know this by now, hopefully. If like you're still attached to having perfectly crisp, clean content on TikTok, then like, I'm sorry, that's just not the case anymore. But it's going to breed a lot of really interesting brands, because they might not be immediately recognizable in that space where like, oh, yep, that's that brand, but it's going to mean different things to different people. And then it will kind of like take on the self-evolution, which is really cool for like, if you think about the long-term trajectory of brands as well.
I love that as a vision for the future. And I think that is a wonderful place to move on to the final closing questions, if you're ready for it. So we've got 3 coming up. So Sam, when do we ask everyone who comes on Building Brand Advocacy? So first of all, what marketing related advice would you give to your 21-year-old self?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite questions, because I spent my entire 20s first half of my 20s doing this, and the second half regretting that I did this, which was this. I will tell anyone that is in the beginning of the career, this is the youngest you'll ever be, and you are the youngest person in the room, and use your voice. Really, like if you are a young person and you are just starting your career, do not underestimate the value of your voice. And again, I will look to Gen Z. I think they know the value of their voice a little bit more than us.
I was about to say that I'm not sure this is necessarily going to be landing on deaf ears.
Yeah, true. But I don't know. I've still worked with some young folks that are second guessing their own voice a little bit. I mean, it's just like, yes, generational change, but also it's just comes at the cause of not knowing exactly who you are when you're in your early 20s, right?
So number 2 is, what counterintuitives have you learnt along the way?
So one of the counterintuitive things is that you come in and you think, especially at this level, that people want you to be experts. And I think a lot of, executives or people as director level give this advice, but like, you need to not assume that you're an expert in that consumer segment and really, really learn it.
Final question then. So who in the world of brand building would you like to take for lunch? Or dinner, or drinks, or maybe a really long lunch that's led to drinks, then dinner. So who knows? I
am obsessed with the idea of blending behavioral psychology and all the pieces that Seth Godin, Brene Brown, Simon Sinek, Adam Grant, those people are like my marketing teachers more than any other textbook on marketing is. So I would love to have a roundtable dinner, which just like all of them, and just be like, what does brand building and marketing look like? Seth Godin's This Is Marketing book is like probably my Bible of marketing. So I would love to pick his brain, especially he just came on Tim Ferriss, and he had a quote that I actually wrote down because I wanted to speak to it because I think it's so good. But he talks about, some people believe that the purpose of business is to enable culture, to enable humanity. And some people believe that the purpose of humanity and culture is to enable business. And I think that this really, it's all back to our conversation about like, okay, so that's all well and good, but how the heck do we do this?
Maddie, that has been marvelous. I really enjoyed this, super wide ranging, touching on loads of different things, but the answer is co-creation and community, something which I'm a massive fan of, I think. Thank you so much for being on the Building Brand Advocacy podcast. Where can people reach out to you if they want to have a chat?
Yeah, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, Madeline Sims. Yes, I have like different names at this point. Maddie Cragen, Maddie Sims, Madeline Sims. It's all there, but Madeline Sims on LinkedIn. Perfect.
Amazing. Thanks a lot.